Welcome to the Doggy Dutch Audio Stories, where weekly card readings open into reflections on manifestation, systems, sovereignty, and everyday life. Brought to you by the Etsy shop Alchemy of Me. The Line is Not the Limit coloring book and the Walking the Universe ecosystem for manifestation. Episode 11. Have you ever been in a season where you did the work? You planted, tended, waited, and still found yourself standing in between the planting and harvest? This episode is for those moments. The title for today's story is The In-Between. Dutch has been reflecting on his social justice and manifestation oracle card pull, a reading drawn using the metaphor for life cards. From the coloring book titled Walking the Universe, Manifestation Through Dog Training by Dr. Siobhan Ballasing Williams. Available from Amazon and Barnes & Noble. The cards in the reading were Rekindle Faith, Integrate Attunement, Surrender Attachment, and Emerge Exquisite. Dutch lets the reading sit beside him. He carries the cards quietly and notices what reveals itself along the way.
One slow afternoon, Dutch finally got around to repotting some of his houseplants, a chore that had been long overdue. The roots of several plants had begun to ball and tangle. They were pressing against the inside of their containers because they had reached the edge of what the pot could hold. So, Dutch loosened the soil gently, lifted the roots carefully, and set each plant into a container with more room, fresh soil around it, more space below it, a different hold. As he worked his hands through the dirt, his thoughts drifted, as they often did.
Lately, Dutch has been traveling through his rest journal, a coloring journey with empowering motivational statements, available from the Etsy shop Alchemy of Me, a journal organized around affirmations and the wisdom of seasons.
Dutch thought that just as plants move through cycles, so does his life. And he thought if the different seasons of plants call for different kinds of tending, then perhaps the different seasons of his life may call for different tending too. That insight was rooting in him while he repotted his plants, making him wonder about his affirmations.
As his hands worked to unball the tangled plant roots, his thoughts worked to detangle his affirmations.
Dutch had been observing something about his affirmation language. On days when the harvest had not yet come, the words in his affirmations spoke as though it had.
And this created dissonance for him.
The rest journal he downloaded from the Etsy shop Alchemy of Me had given him language for every season.
But in that moment, Dutch realized he had been reaching for the same season's language every time, in every situation, for every circumstance, regardless of which season he was actually standing in.
And the season he found himself in most often, the one that needed its own language most, was the season of the in-between.
Dutch began to wonder about that season. The season between planting and harvest, when the seeds are in the ground, when the tending has been diligent, but the fruit has not yet appeared, and the need to be fed is real.
He thought that in-between was its own season, and it deserved its own language.
Dutch reflected on the story systems had perpetuated regarding that in-between.
Systems built on scarcity had labeled the gap between planting and harvest as personal failure,
calling it evidence that something was wrong with the farmer,
turning it into proof that something was defective in the person tending,
making the time between planting and harvest into documentation of deficiency rather than simply a season.
And Dutch observed how certain manifestation teachings did the same thing.
When the harvest was delayed, the explanation that was most reliably returned was, your belief is off. Your vibration needs correction. Tend yourself differently.
As though the in-between was always a verdict on the person standing inside it.
And Dutch thought, perhaps that was one of the most harmful stories ever told about a season.
Through the cards and his readings, Dutch had been realizing some specific things about the in-between.
He was realizing that it was not evidence of absence. It was process.
He was realizing that the current moment was not the final chapter.
He was realizing that not having a harvest now was not the same as denial of a harvest.
He was realizing that rehearsing the story of nothing is changing, nothing is coming, only made the season harder to move through.
He was realizing that challenge was not proof of failure.
And he was also realizing that these stories could be refused. Not by pretending the hunger did not exist,
Not by performing certainty the body did not feel.
but by choosing language that met the season, without collapsing into it.
Dutch realized he had been using one kind of language for every season. Declaration language, harvest language,
Spring words, spoken in winter.
autumn words, spoken in summer.
And that was where the rest journal seasons had become a map for Dutch, a way to choose language that met the season.
He thought, a plant still in the growing season does not need the language of full bloom.
It needs tending language.
It needs patient and steadying language.
So Dutch began to ask himself, what season am I actually in today?
Am I in spring, when something new is beginning, when intention is forming but nothing is visible yet, when the ground feels fresh but uncertain?
Or am I in summer, when the work is real but unconfirmed, when the harvest feels far, when pressure to see results is building?
Or am I in autumn, when something finally arrives, when what was tended becomes visible, when the nervous system can finally rest into what is here?
Or am I in winter, when it is time to be still, when what was harvested is being integrated, when the body needs restoration before the next beginning?
For each season, Dutch began to find language that could meet him there. He thought again about spring, when intention is fresh, when something new is beginning, when everything is preparation and possibility.
In that season, the words that fit were seeding words, like,
I am the seed.
I am readiness.
I am the beginning of what is coming.
Spring language, he thought, plants without demanding immediate proof.
Then he thought about the season after spring,
He thought about summer.
the season of in-between, the season Dutch had been living in, the season he felt he lived in most.
And that season deserved its own language. Because summer is when the harvest is not yet visible, when the tending is faithful, but the fruit has not appeared.
System said, this gap means something about you, that because the harvest is not here yet, something must be wrong with you, with how you have tended. It is personal flaw.
And some spiritual practices like manifestation teachings echo this through dogma like, adjust yourself, align better, believe harder, as though the gap itself is evidence of failure.
But Dutch was learning to refuse that story.
Summer is a season that asks a great deal from him.
It asks him to keep tending without proof, to keep watering what cannot yet be seen.
It asks for faith from him.
But summer is not failure. Summer is a season of process.
And so summer, he thought, deserves language that honors the tending, not language that demands the harvest.
So, for summer, the days of in-between when the harvest feels far and his nervous system is humming, the kind of words that feel fitting are words for waiting.
Words like, I am in season.
I am the tending.
I am patience.
I attune to what is moving quietly beneath the surface.
What belongs with me is not lost because it is not yet visible.
Current evidence is not final conclusion.
Delay is not denial.
I respond from a version of me that expects a harvest, without pretending the hunger does not exist.
Dutch thought, summer language tends without demanding proof of harvest.
Then he thought about the season after summer. He thought about autumn, and it occurred to him as interesting that the season of in-between is followed by the season of harvest.
And he thought about how harvest season is when what was planted becomes visible.
When the work that could not be seen finally shows itself. When declaration language finally has ground to stand on.
For autumn, he thought, the words that fit were words of bloom.
Words like, I am supply.
I am abundance.
I am wealth. Autumn language, he thought, receives without apology, because it is a season when the harvest is here.
And finally, he thought about the season after autumn.
He thought about winter, the season of rest and preparation.
When the field lies quiet.
When what was harvested is stored and held. When pruning happens, so that spring can begin again with stronger roots.
Dutch knew that for some, winter did not feel like rest.
For some, the quiet of a field could feel like void.
Like waiting for something to run out.
He knew it could feel like emptiness rather than rest.
Still, even then, Dutch was aware that his language could reject collapse. And Dutch thought the kind of winter words that would refuse collapse were steadying words. Words like, I am renewal.
I am the wisdom of what I have grown.
I am rest.
I am the I am, even in the quiet.
The field being still does not mean the field is finished.
I am endurance.
Winter language, he thought, does not demand more growth. It holds what is, and refuses to call the quiet an ending.
Dutch wiggled his fingers in the soil for a few seconds, and he took a deep breath in.
As he inhaled, he thought about summer and winter side by side. He thought about how both were hard in their own way.
Summer's hardness was invisible.
It was the pressure of tending what could not yet be seen.
And it was refusing certainty the body did not feel.
Winter's hardness was visible in the silence of the field.
That quiet, evoking fear that was historic.
Inherited.
And socialized.
Fear that said, stillness meant finished.
That rest was risk.
Dutch thought winter is a hard season, but not in the same way as summer.
Winter is not the same as being in between.
He thought about how winter's quiet field is different to summer's season of waiting. And he thought about how winter follows the season of harvest.
Winter follows autumn. Winter does not precede autumn. Summer does.
But what winter does precede is spring, the season of planting.
Dutch took another deep breath and paused for another moment, letting his hands in the soil orient him.
Winter and summer, different seasons, he thought. Different kinds of hard.
Each deserving their own language.
Both deserving more than collapse.
With that thought in mind, Dutch pressed a lasso of soil around the final plant and watered it lightly. Not too much, just enough.
And he reminded himself that care works by season.
He thought, perhaps that was what the reading had been pointing toward all along.
To rekindling faith, not by forcing harvest language before the season was ready, but by trusting that roots count even when fruit has not appeared.
To integrating attunement, by listening for which season the body was actually standing within, and choosing language that could meet it there.
To surrendering attachment to the harvest as the only proof that the planting mattered.
While also surrendering attachment to the fear that the quiet of winter meant the field was finished.
And to emerging exquisite, one season at a time.
One affirmation at a time.
One sentence at a time.
Dutch looked at his newly repotted plants.
Each one in fresh soil.
Each one with more room than before.
None of them in bloom.
All of them tended.
And that, he thought, was enough for today.
The end. If something in this met you, take a breath with Dutch and let it simmer for a moment. Let's breathe in. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold together. 4, 3, 2, 1. And now we exhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep noticing what reveals itself along the way. And remember, if you would like to perform your own readings, the A Metaphor for Life Oracle cards are available for print and immediate download from the Etsy shop, Alchemy of Me.